So, this is the rundown for Chapter 2, which is titled The Honeymoon. I want to start on the title page. Um, it's one of the really good examples of visual and verbal irony kind of working together. So, obviously, it's called The Honeymoon because Vlad and Anya have just gotten married, and this is supposed to be the next phase of their life, which is supposed to be very exciting. But the image completely contradicts that notion. The biggest image in the entire panel is the swastika. It's also the lightest and darkest, so it's got the more stark contrast. Um, the background is very dark and shaded, which has an ominous feel to it. These feel like they could be houses or they could be barracks. And then notice that the mice are both under the flag and in silhouette. So, in multiple ways, they're being overshadowed by the flag, and the flag representing the new regime moving in. The reason that they're starting to see this as they're moving into Czechoslovakia is that Czechoslovakia was actually annexed by the Nazis prior to Poland. So they were further along in the process of, quote, Germanization. So, this little bit with the pills is pretty much just showing us that Vlad, even to this day, still feels like if he's going to survive, it's going to be on his terms. Like he's the only one who could be in control of his own survival. He can't rely on anyone else. Hence the counting of the pills, not really trusting the doctors. He's the one who has to make sure he's going to survive. And that's something that he definitely picked up from the war. So when we go back into their story, after Anya's little dalliance with the communist, they have their firstborn, whose name is Rishu. He's born in 1937. And at this point, after he's born, Anya starts to develop postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is when a woman goes through a bout of kind of separation depression after having a child. But at this point, we didn't know what it was, or they didn't know what it was. And so the quote unquote cure for someone who was so emotionally unstable that no one knew what to do with them was to send them to a sanitarium, which is basically a mental institute or mental hospital where they just sit and do nothing until they pull themselves together and can re-enter society. So that's what happens and what brings them to Czechoslovakia. And this is when we start really seeing the spread of the war, and how things are kind of progressing. So this is when they first see the swastika being flown freely. Imagine that image and what it represents, and then seeing it just kind of flying freely in the middle of general society. And then this page is probably one of the more important pages in Maus 1 in terms of visual symbolism. Not only are we showing rumor and how that fear is one of the ways that they were able to maintain control, but it also gives us a lot of clues of what's going on. So here we've got a pogrom. Pogrom is an ethnic cleansing. It's usually referring to the issue in Germany and Eastern Europe. And they're talking about the deportations out of Czechoslovakia at this point. Here we see an example of discrimination in the marking of the Jewish factory. This is very likely a reference to Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was one of the turning points in aggression towards Jewish members of society and removal of their civil rights. It literally translates to the Night of Broken Glass, and it was a point where there were riots of German citizens just basically tearing down everything Jewish. It's called Broken Glass because they broke all the windows, they destroyed synagogues, they destroyed businesses. The businesses they didn't destroy, they marked with either a Star of David or the word Jude, which meant Jew, which was basically a warning not to buy anything there. This panel here is illustrating the dehumanization stage. We've got these mice looking very downcast, being forced to carry a sign that says, "I am a filthy Jew," which is reinforcing that idea that they are vermin. And you have the Gestapo, or the Jewish police, or not Jewish police, I'm sorry, the Nazi police, basically just laughing and publicly humiliating them. Here we have the rumors of disappearances, which again, spreading rumor through fear, or spreading fear through rumor, and people basically just disappearing. And then this panel I want to take a second on, because this term right here, "this town is Jew free," these banners would actually be hung up. And the Jew free is the English translation of Judenfrei. And this was actually one of the major goals for the Nazi Party, was to declare the whole Reich either Judenfrei or Judenrein. Judenrein means cleansed of Jews, so it's actually a more severe term. They were sadly successful in this in a number of places. In fact, 11 territories, occupied territories or countries, were declared Judenfrei or Judenrein from 1938 to 1944. The bigger ones being Vienna in 1942, so Vienna, Austria, the capital, Croatia, the entire Republic of Croatia in 1944, Berlin declared in 1943. And at this same point, the way that they were getting to this kind of quote-unquote goal of being Jew-free was largely through the mobile death squads that the Nazis would send out, which are known as the Einsatzgruppen. These basically were exactly what it says. They were mobile death squads. They would be groups of soldiers, German soldiers, that would move through the countryside of Czechoslovakia and Lithuania and Latvia, and a lot of those Eastern European countries that were annexed prior to Poland, and basically round up and execute mass numbers of Jewish citizens in the countryside and bury them in mass graves. And when I say large numbers, through this point, and this was what led up to the gas chambers, eventually they realized that it would be more pragmatic or more efficient to deport prisoners to killing centers instead of having the killing centers move around to different prisoners. But Russia had 3,800 executions. Estonia had 963. And then the two countries hit hardest were Latvia, who had 32,238, and Lithuania, which was hit the hardest at 136,421 executions. So eventually they get Anya to the sanitarium, and she spends time, quote unquote, convalescing. And then this panel is a good one to look at the race metaphor. He uses race by using animals to portray different ethnicities or nationalities, and he uses a number of them in the background here. The reason he does this is not to show that there's such stark difference between them. It's kind of twofold. Practically, he does it because it's easier to understand the differentiation between the ethnicities he's talking about, so it's just kind of easier for the reader. But it's also being set up to fail because he's trying to show that at the end of the day, you cannot reduce someone down to a single trait. So we have, obviously, the Jewish citizens are represented as mice because they were considered vermin. and commonly referred to as rats by Hitler. The obvious choice for the Germans then would be cats. So cats represent the Germans and the Nazis. The pigs are the Poles, the non-Jewish Polish citizens. They are drawn as pigs because the Germans referred to them as Schwein or pig because they considered them unclean. The frog here represents a French person because there's the stereotype of French people with frog's legs. And then I'm actually not super sure what the rabbits are. I think maybe Belgian, but I'm not positive. So moving on, we have the drafting of Vlad into the Polish army. So he is drafted because he is a Polish citizen, like a Jewish person in America would still be an American citizen. He is drafted into the Polish army to fight the invading German forces. The Germans invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. And by September 3rd, Britain and France officially declared war. But that's what he is being sent to the front lines to fight. As he is being sent to the front lines, Anya and Rishu go to Sosnowiec, where they stay and wait for Vlad to return, hopefully safely. And then again, at the end, we have the interaction between Art and his father, Vlad.